ASMR featuring the Dead by Daylight killers and their backgrounds in ASMR form. First, we're gonna start off with the Trapper, the main icon of Dead by Daylight killer-wise. Evan Macmillan idolized his father. It wasn't just that he was heir to a great fortune, it was the way he ran the estate. Raised under his firm hand, Evan had taken to running the workforce with an iron hand. Production was always high and the Macmillan estate prospered under father and son. As Archie Macmillan's mental health slowly disintegrated, Evan protected him from the herd who wanted a piece of fortune. No matter his father asked of him, Evan would do. When Archie Macmillan finally snapped, Evan became his enforcer in what would become known as the worst mass murder in modern history. They never proved that Evan led over 100 men into those dark tunnels before detonating the explosives and sealing them to their fate. The tale of Macmillan Estate is a tale of wealth and power gone very wrong. How many victims fell to the hands of father and son is unknown. No record is ever made of what became of Evan Macmillan. His father is another unsolved puzzle. Found trapped in the locker basement of his own warehouse, starved and abandoned. The Wraith. Philip Ojomo came to this country without anything than hope for a new beginning. He was happy as he got offered a job at Autohaven Wreckers, a small scrapyard where bribed cops turned a blind eye for the somewhat shady business that took place. Ojomo didn't care. He had seen criminal activity up close in his homeland, and as long as he didn't get involved, he let things be. He just fixed cars and handled the crusher. Something he did really well. A car went in, and a small metallic cube came out. It was not until one gloomy day that he, just by accident, saw some blood coming from one of the uncrushed cars. As he opened the trunk, he found a young man, gagged and with tied hands with panic-filled eyes. He freed the man who managed to run 10 feet before Ojomo's boss stopped him and slit his throat. As Ojomo demanded answers, he got explained to him that he'd been nothing more than a simple executioner, as more or less every car had a soul in them, as this was a service in quotations. The scrapyard provided to certain quotation clients. He snapped and went ballistic. He threw his paws in the crusher and let it slowly compress. As the head stuck out, he grabbed it and pulled the head and spine out of the body. Then he left and was never seen again. Hillbilly. The son of wealthy landowners Max Thompson and Evelyn Thompson. This unnamed boy was an unwanted child born to savage parents. Hideously disfigured, he was shut away from society. So ashamed of their son, they bricked him off into a room and fed him through a hole in the wall. When the boy escaped, he took his revenge savagely and terribly, slaughtering the parents that tortured him instead of raising him. After the deed was done, he continued to live his life at the farm, taking out his deranged violence on the animals that were allowed to run free. As he finally broke free from his shackles, he ran through the cornfields, chasing and slaughtering whatever he could find. They never found the bodies of Max and Evelyn, but they did find tortured and disemboweled animals all over the farm. Goldwind Farm was quickly settled, and the land split up and sold off. There was never a buyer for the farmhouse. Perhaps it was the sound of the chainsaw you could hear throughout those hot summer nights. The Nurse. Sally Smithson came to town with dreams of children's feet and laughter in a wooden home built by her husband Andrew. But life came not with smiles, but with plans of destruction. Andrew worked as a lumberjack, a job with its perils. One day, Andrew's foreman had to pay Sally a visit, forever changing her life. She was alone, without food on the table and no other option. Sally had to find a way, but the only employment she could get was at the Crotus Friend Asylum. Nobody sought employment there unless they were in dire need, just like Sally. Without any education, she started at the bottom, doing the hard night shift. Over the years, her mind had reached its limits. 2 decades of seeing horrid things that violate the eyes, memories that are replayed every night, being abused verbally and physically by people without limits. Sally saw insanity from the outside just to catch her herself. Finally, she could not take it anymore, and concepts of purification emerged inside her. She did what she felt was necessary. As the morning staff arrived one day in September, they found over 50 dead patients, lifeless in their bed along with staff members, also dead. Only Sally had to survive the night, but her mind was gone, rocking back and forth non-stop. Exactly what happened is only known by her, but it seems that some of them had choked, as they had marks around their necks. They got into an ambulance, but that ambulance never reached the hospital. It was found crashed in a nearby wood, all the staff dead, and Sally nowhere to be found. Michael Myers. Some humans are simply bad seeds, seeds infused with a distilled and pure form of evil. Michael Myers was one of those seeds. He had no issues with causing the pain of others. Instead, it was exactly what he sought, but even life can be tough on those with minds filled with terror. The difference is just how one goes about to solve those problems. For Michael, he had to kill to find some inner peace. As he took his sister's life, the police found a silent boy dressed as a clown at the scene. When one stumbles upon a growing fire, one does not pour gasoline on it. But this was an action taken by officials that had no idea how it shaped this demon in the boy's body. Sending Michael to a mental institution was a freeable attempt to save the child. Unsuccessful therapy and nightly screams just made him even more introverted and deranged. People hoped that Michael Myers would end up a parenthesis, soon to be forgotten and buried, a failure that soon were to rot away. But then, he escaped. Next is the Hag. Lisa Sherwood grew up in a quiet village, mainly isolated from the rest of civilization. The people of the hamlet were kind, and the elders kept old traditions alive, often keeping the peace by personally settling the ever-rare disputes. Lisa was particularly fond of the charms they taught her to draw for safety and good fortune. One night, as she was walking home through the woods, a terrible storm struck without warning. Howling winds whipped at her hair as she stumbled through the swamp. Her rain-drenched dress plastered to her skin. In the slick, wet mud, she lost her footing, careening backwards and striking her head against rock, slipping in and out of consciousness. She strained to identify the dark shapes approaching her from between the trees. That's the last thing she could remember. Her kidnappers kept her chained to the wall in a flooded cellar. Though dimly lit, she could see others whose large open wounds swarmed with flies. It took nearly a day before they returned, carving chunks from the prisoners' bodies with rusted blades, consuming their very flesh down to the bone. Most she saw did not survive long once the cannibals targeted them, but somehow deeply within, Lisa persisted. Starved, infected, and mutilated after several weeks of torture. Her gaunt arms became loose in their shackles. She pulled hard, the metal tearing through skin and muscle until she was free. Her flesh oozed vicious yellow pus and bones were visible beneath the dangerous wounds. She could go no further. Delirious, she thought of home. She thought of the elders. With her dying breath, she etched the symbols they had tar into the floor using what remained of her fingers. Almost in response, a dark hunger stirred inside her, a yearning for blood. In oath, she chose vengeance. The village's search party eventually brought them to an old shack in a swamp. Inside, its previous inhabitants had been viciously dismembered and devoured by an unidentifiable animal. In the cellar, amid rotting corpses and disconnected flesh, the elder's charms were scrawled in blood on the floor. Lisa's body was not among the bodies and was never found. The village was never the same again. CIA. Brain power is a must if you're about to conquer the world and demolish foes across the pond. The CIA understood this, so integration and intelligence became their #1 priority. All they needed were brilliant people, like Carter. Carter and other top-tier recruits were transferred off campus and into a secret black site facility in Illinois, known as Larry's Memorial Institute. A project craves a mentor, and that's where Mr. Stamper stepped in, who taught Carter that information is everything and knowledge is power. He was given all instruments needed, a guiding hand, and more or less everything he asked for. He never realized that sunlight had started to become so scarce that he, too, was kept in the dark, because knowledge doesn't only give you power, it also transforms you into a threat. To extract information was his mission. Mr. Stamper encouraged Carter to go further and not to consider this a normal medical facility. No eyes were watching them. There were no rules to abide. The agency just pointed Carter in the right direction. Then he started to take a few steps back as he saw how Carter could walk on his own. Docile test subjects were exchanged for real, live species, people that played a role in the troubles outside the facility. Carter shouldered this new role. Project Awakening took form, and on paper, Carter described it as experimental integration. It was approved, and over a few months, nobody knocked on his door. Screams and moans filled the corridor outside his lab, but war askew people that what they accept as long as the enemy is kept at bay. The fluorescent lights flickered more and more often. Electroconvulsive treatment became a standard dish on the menu. Prisoners out of the facility begged the guards to take them to any other lab or cars. Rumors were disregarded in the beginning. Over the years, Carter became known as a doctor, and no one ever questioned it if he had even held a medical certificate, or even what happened to the prisoners after he had given up their information. It was only after the Larry's Memorial Institute went silent for a week that they finally uncovered the true horror of what had happened there. Carter's experimental information extraction had turned to horrific and bizarre torture. Patients and prisoners were found dead or in vegetative states with all types of head trauma. In his office, they found the most terrible discovery of all, Mr. Stamper himself. His head peeled open, and an array of electrodes and sensors inserted into his still working but annihilated brain. There was no sign of Herman, the doctor, Carter, but his research papers suggested that he had been using the prisoners as part of awful ECT experiments as he searched for the panacea of mind control. The government didn't want to know. The black site was condemned, and all knowledge of Larry's Memorial Institute redacted forever. Next is Andres. As soon as Anna was able to walk, her mother started teaching her how to survive a harsh, solitary life in the northern woods. Living in such a extremely remote and dangerous area required skill and resilience. When sunlight became too dim for productive activities, they would take refuge in their house, a sturdy old cabin constructed to resist the toughest winters. Close to the hearth's warmth, Anna would rest in her mother's arms, surrounded by the few wooden toys and masks she had crafted for her, drifting off to sleep with stories and lullabies. She dreamed happy dreams, ignorant of the events that would soon change everything. Anna and her mother were stalking a great elk through the woods. They knew it was dangerous prey, but it had been a particularly difficult winter, and they were almost out of food. The specter of starvation frightened them more than any forest creature. Without warning, the elk reared, loud, and charged Anna. She was paralyzed with fear as the whole world seemed to shake under the immense beast's pounding hooves. The elk was close enough for Anna to see the murderous fury in her eyes when her mother threw herself in its path, axe in hand. A blood-curdling scream escaped from her lips as the elk impaled her upon its antlers and hoisted her into the air. With all her strength, she brought her axe down on its head, and again, while tried to shake her loose. With a sickening crack, the antler snapped on us, and Anna's mother was free. The beast collapsed. Anna was too small to move her mother's broken body, so she sat with her in the clearing where she had fallen, to distract her from the dying elk's cries. Anna's mother held her and hummed her favorite lullaby. They stayed like that, the huntress and the elk getting quieter and colder, until Anna was alone in the silent forest. Eventually she stood up and started the long walk back home. Still a child, she knew just enough about life in the frozen forest to survive. She followed her instincts and became one of the wild. She got older and stronger and practiced her hunt. As she grew into a dangerous predator, her humanity became a half-remembered dream. She widened her territory and lived off her hunts. She worked her way up to the squirrels and hares and mink and foxes, and eventually she grew tired of them and hunted more dangerous animals like wolves and bears. When unsuspecting travelers came through her woods, she discovered her new favorite prey: humans. Unlucky souls who strayed into the territory were slaughtered like any other animal. She liked to collect their tools and colorful garments, and especially toys when they were little ones, but she could never bring herself to kill the little girls. Girls she would take back to her house, deep in the woods. They were precious, and looking at them woke up something deep in her heart. She craved the closeness of a loved one, a child of her own. Among the village wooden toys, dolls, and storybooks she couldn't read, the girls would be tied by the neck with rough and tape-shaving rope fastened firmly to the wall. She couldn't let them wander off, or they would surely die outside. Every time the girls would waste away and die of cold or starvation or sickness. Every time it plunged Anna deeper into pain, sorrow, and madness. She was compelled to try again and start raiding the nearest villagers to slaughter families and kidnap their daughters. She wore one of the animal masks her mother crafted for her so many years earlier to try to calm the frightened children. Villagers spread the legend of half-beasts lurking in Red Forest, the hunters who killed men and ate little girls. War eventually came to the forest. German soldiers began to pass through on the march to attack the collapsing Russian Empire. During these dark times, there were no more travelers. The villagers had abandoned their homes, and no more little ones to be found, only soldiers. Many of them were found with violent axe wounds. Whole groups disappeared mysteriously. Once the war was over, the rumors of the huntress disappeared with it, engulfed by the Red Forest. Next is the cannibal, or, Leatherface. Whether killers performed their heinous acts by the compulsions of their deceased minds, or if they are forced into them by external pressures, has long been a matter of debate. But for one, nature and nurture were inextricably linked. Leatherface kills not from desire to exert his will over others, to satisfy carnal urges, or even to quiet the voices in his head. He kills because he is scared that others will hurt him, scared that his family displeased with him, scared that their shared willingness to eat human flesh will be discovered. He says he is told his family loves him, and that is all that matters. Outsiders are a threat, and threats need to be dealt with. Like those kids that came into the house uninvited, walked in like they owned the place, looked around the house, trying to find out his family's secrets, no doubt. But Leatherface deals with them, and protects his family just as he's been caught. He is not just the protector. He has many roles, and each role has its own face. He serves dinner, cares for the family, and dresses well when they eat. His grandpa and ma used to care for them all, but grandpa is old now and ma has been still for a while. So Leatherface and his brothers had to take over. Family is everything to him. Family is security and safety. But even though he did his best, one of the kids got away. He tried to stop her, chasing after her as fast as he could, but she had help. Another outsider driving a truck. The evil trucker killed his brother, ran him over like he was a possum in a fury. Leatherface leapt at him. The saw ready to avenge his family, but the trucker was too quick. He knocked Leatherface aside and turned his own saw against him. As he watched the outsiders driving away, the rage, grief, and pain, combined with the worry about what would happen to his family now, they would surely return with the police. police, and the police would take his brothers, his grandpa. Without them, what would he do? Without their commands, he would wither and die. As his world collapsed, Leatherface spun in circles, swinging the saw all around, trying to fight off the myriad external threats that surrounded him. Then another feeling overtook him. It came from outside his vision, crawling over his skin with cold dread. He realized that no matter what outsiders could do to him, there was something worse, something bigger that lived in the shadows. He was filled with a terror unlike any he had ever felt before, but it was almost comforting, like the fear he'd felt with his family, the fear of disappointing them. He was brought to a place that was familiar but unknowable, and he instinctively knew what he had to do. He couldn't fail it. The way he had his family, outsiders would come, but he would use his skills to overcome any threats. There would be screaming, but he would make the world quiet again, until the only sound remaining was the blessed howl of the saw. Let the outsiders come. Next is Freddy Krueger. Even while he lived, Freddy Krueger was a creature of nightmares for those who truly knew him. Hiding behind a mask of warmth and friendliness, Freddy's actual temperament was known only to his victims. When those victims were finally heard, the parents of Springwood tracked Freddy down and took the law into their own hands. They thought that that fire had rid them of a monster that night, that their children were finally safe, but evil, as strong as this, has a way of surviving. Years passed, the horror was buried, the victims mercifully forgot. Then somehow, Freddy returned and dreams became nightmares once again. Freddy focused his anger on those he felt and wronged him, building up to his one true obsession, Nancy Holbrook. But he underestimated her strength and resourcefulness. Together with her friend Quentin Smith, she managed to weaken Freddy, mutilating him and leaving him for dead once more. Death didn't want Freddy the first time he encountered it. Why did they think it would take him now? He emerged once more, consumed with vengeance. Then he turned his sights on the boy who had blocked his path to Nancy, his number one. Freddy invaded Quentin's dreams, terrorizing him after night until his strength and defenses would be at their lowest. When the time was right, he forced the boy to return to the dark reflection of Pat in preschool. Here he would have his final revenge. Freddy stalked the boy through the school's halls. He took his time, savoring every moment of dawn. This was what he enjoyed the most. The smell of the sweet sweat in the air, the ragged grasp of their terrified breath. They were his to toy with. There was the boy at the end of a long corridor, too tired and scared to run anymore. Resigned to his fate, Freddy closed in, arms wide and claws raking the wall. Their tips traced along a pipe, the metallic shaking only adding to the boy's apprehension. A shower of sparks rained on the ground and into a liquid that covered the tiled floor. A blue flame blossomed and quickly engulfed the room. The boy took flight as Freddy burst from the flames in a fury. Rooms and walls raced past in a blur until they were in Freddy's basement. There would be no escape from here. Slowly, Freddy closed in on the boy. His fear was so strong now that Freddy could almost taste it, but his eyes burned with a defiant hatred that was almost admirable. Freddy drew back his claws. Then Freddy felt another presence with him, something old, powerful, and dark. A miasma enveloped him, and the only sensation was a sound like wooden beams flexing and creaking in the distance, the echoing groan of metal crushed against metal, something arcane and unknowable. Halfway between language and pure terror, a moment of falling and spinning, and then Freddy was back in the school, but not his school. It looked the same, but it felt different. His powers were tempered in some ways and focused in others. The boy had gone for now, but another prey walked the hallways. Some would be inconsequential. Others would become his new favorites. All would fall behind his claws. Next is the Pig. When John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw, planned for his son to be born during the Chinese zodiac's Year of the Pig, he wanted it to represent fertility and rebirth, a new beginning for him and his wife, and a start of a charmed life for his son. But that plan was shattered on the night that a junkie broke into his wife's clinic, hoping to score. After this event resulted in the deaths of his unborn son. John finally caught up with the junkie, making him his first test subject. And the pig was changed forever too. It became a representation of the disease that was rotting John from the inside, a reminder that we are just meat unless we elevate ourselves by our actions, by grasping life from the jaws of death. The pig became a vessel, an agent of Jigsaw, conveying the subjects to their test. For some of those who emerged victorious, the pig could still be a rebirth into their new lives as apprentices, even disposed of Jigsaw. That was the case for Amanda Young, a troubled soul whose life had been a catalog of harm, both to herself and those around her. That changed when she faced and bested Jigsaw's test. Deciding her life was worth something, she became devoted to Jigsaw's cause, ready to take over when cancer consumed him. But she became more dependent on John, her anguish at his impeding death, combining with a belief that their test subjects weren't capable of saving themselves, of being reborn in the crucible of the games. Seeing this, John presented her with another game, another chance to save herself, but Amanda let her rage and jealousy rule her actions. She failed the test and took a bullet as a consequence. Bleeding out on the tile floor, darkness engulfed Amanda's vision, accompanied by a sound like creaking wood. Then she was in the forest, once more viewing the world through the eyes of a pig. Trees surrounded her, their branches clawing at her from all sides. Waves of panic washed over her, and she could hear her breath reverberating inside the mask. Had she be damned, Carissa spent her days here, in disguise. Or maybe this was another test. Maybe she hadn't failed at all. John always thought one step ahead of everyone else, planned for every eventuality, and he would never give up on her surely. Jigsaw may have gone, but he had passed her on to another, a being for whom she would be the pig again. Ultimately, she saw now that she had been right in the choices she had made. The time for games was over. There was no chance of redemption for any of them. They were meat, and meat was destined to die. Next is the clown. It's a very long, so I'm gonna cut it kind of short. Kenneth Chase was born in 1932 by difficult labor, which his mother would survive. This event drove a rift between him and his father that never closed. As the boy grew, so did his father's resentment and his drinking habit. By the time Kenneth was at school, they lived mostly separate lives. Academically, he was unremarkable, coasting by on his significant athletic prowess. He grew tall and strong, excelling at track events, but shunned any attempts to coax him into team sports. On his walk from home from school, he would often find feathers on the ground, and he soon became a collection, keeping them in a cigar box under his bed. With his father either at work or an alcohol-induced stupor, Kenneth had hours to spend alone, transfixed by the regularity of the feathers, barbs, and the feelings of softness, as he ran them over his lips, watching the birds that came to the feeder in his garden. He imagined how soft they must be and resolved to catch one. He ingratiated himself with a local dentist, soon procuring some anesthetic. Using this, he rigged up a trap on the feeder that he had hoped would knock out a bird long enough that he could touch it. Eventually, he was able to capture a robin with his trap. Over the next decade, he stayed with the circus, traveling the length and breadth of the United States, but with the itinerant life providing few repercussions, he fell into bad home habits, drinks, junk food, drugs. He indulged in all of them to excess. These vices were enough, but then his old urges returned and his nomadic existence became a cover for him to resume killing. He stole clothes and makeup from performers, fashioning a disguise that would let him get close to his victims before he anesthetized them, bringing them back to his caravan, where they would be awake to find themselves bound, and at his mercy, he would finally get to have his fun, mentally and physically torturing them. Their screams fueling him before being lost in the night. He basically did that to literally anyone. But then since then he had roamed the country, a parasite who would always be found at a carnivore circus, but who would never be seen on any playbill. He lured those brave or foolish enough to come near, trapped them, and moved on before they could be found missing. Somewhere along the way, he left the ordinary roads of the United States behind him, traveling through a veil of mist and entering a new realm. It was a place of transience and permanence, perfectly suiting the life he had chosen to lead, feeling more at home than he had in his entire life. He set up camp and waited for his first visitor. That's scary. Next is a spirit. Rin was the only child of the Yamaoka family. She was raised in the dusty halls of a traditional house in Kagawa. She studied education at Takamatsu, a private university, which weighed heavily on her family's shaky finances. Her mother got ill that year and the bills started piling up. Rin worked part-time in Budo, attempt to help lighten the load. Her father faced a debt that grew without end. He started working double shifts in hopes of obtaining a promotion. That's when he started losing sleep. A dark whisper would keep him awake all night, reminding him of his hopeless situation. Exhausted, he started to lose grasp of reality, fighting to deny that the voice whispered at night. Rin's father made a desperate move. He met with his superior and explained the situation. He begged for a bonus in advance, time off, anything. Unfortunately, his request was denied, and it kind of went poorly from there. That evening, Rin came home from work. She stayed late to entertain customers that lingered at the restaurant. As she parked her bike in the shed, she heard her mother scream from the house. She rushed in, climbing up the stairs to her parents' room. There she found bits and pieces of her mother on the floor. Her limbs were clean-cut, tangled up in a natural position. Her breasts were sliced up, revealing her ribcage, which was cracked open. Rin gagged, and that's when a katana came crashing down. Rin blocked the blade, which buried her forearm, and that's probably why she has bandages. And it was because of her father doing that. She rushed off, and she stepped back, trembling as she held together the soft, loose flesh of her abdomen. Images of her mother's tangled limbs finished over her eyes. She then charged at his father, making him stumble back. The father punched her torn abdomen, and she recoiled in pain. As she struggled to get back up, he slashed her thigh, making her collapse on the floor. As she crawled towards the stairs, he grabbed her and yanked her against the partition. The glass shattered and she fell through, landing on one floor down. She heard footsteps somewhere, and the shards gnawed her, ripping her flesh. He had to be stopped. He would not get away with what he'd done to her, with what he'd done to her mother. Coughing up blood, her chin grazed the glass. Adding to the bleeding, a low-pitched heartbeat started to ring in her ears. Her body felt so heavy she could no longer move. The ground shook with her father's footsteps. She knew she was not going to make it, but she no longer cared. She would make him pay. In this life or the next. A dark fog slowly filled her eyes, but it would not subdue her rage. She would not rest, not yet. The darkness whispered, promising blood and revenge. An oath was made, and Rin closed her eyes. Next is Legion. Frank Morrison was 19 and had little to show for it. He'd stopped attending school after being kicked out of the basketball team for shoving a referee into the stands. Yet Frank was a man of potential. who would light up a room despite his bleak childhood. At 6 years old, he'd been taken away from Calgary to start a circuit of foster homes. No matter how many times he lashed out through tantrums and constant fights, they kept moving him into new and familiar houses. His last move had been 3 years prior when his last foster died. Clive Andrews had picked him up from the adoption center. They had been on the road for 7 hours before reaching a small bungalow in Ormond. It would be the longest time they spent together. Clive was too busy trading checks from family services for drinks at the bar. Ormond was a small, stale place. Frank was an outsider, and there's Julie. Julie is a beautiful girl who is convinced that she deserved better life in Ormond. And then there's Joey, who liked to show off and was shy and naive. Susie and Julie were best friends, and Frank attended the parties that Julie threw, where everyone was younger than him and easily impressed what she liked. And while they all hung out at the abandoned lodge, which that big building is, the map probably is, and they all got into trouble with jobs and stuff. And basically, as the group stared at Frank in shock from vandalizing and stuff, he ordered them to finish the job. Joey clenched his jaw, grabbing the knife and stabbing the bleeding man in the ribs. Susie didn't want to do it. Frank shouted at her they had to finish what they'd started. Julie closed her eyes and slid the knife into the man's chest. She handed the wet blade to Susie. They're all in this together now. Susie stared at Julie in disbelief as Frank grabbed her trembling hands and inserted the knife deep into the man's throat. Frank told them to move fast. They mopped the blood off the floor, stashed the body in the trunk of Joey's car, and drove up to Mount Ormond. All four were digging in the muddy snow to dispose of the body when Frank spotted something moving through the woods. He grabbed his knife and broke from the group to check it out. The fog thickened from Frank, becoming so dense that he soon could no longer see ahead. He retracted his steps and stumbled upon an ominous trail. He followed the eerie path as if called by the darkness. Julie, Susie, and Joey finished checking, but Frank was nowhere to be seen. Julie spotted his muddy footsteps in the snow, and the three of them followed the trail, which took them longer into the woods. When Julie, Susie, and Joey did not return home that night, their parents thought they'd run away with Frank. Each family came up with a different theory. The mood in the town changed, however, when a body was found by an abandoned lodge of Mount Ormond. That's theory. Scary. Next is the plague. Oh well, her lore is very interesting on the wiki. When she was 5 years old, Adiris, the youngest of a family of 7, was left on the brick red burning steps of the Temple of Purgation at the center of Babylon. The process of shock and sorrow, she held on to the belief that the gods had a plan for her. Her new life was one of the quiet servitude. She would tend to the gardens, prepare ceremonial meals, and polish ceremonial incense burners. At night, she would pray for a sign that would reveal her purpose. She eventually went to go see priests, and priests needed her. Also, cleansings were being performed daily to answer the demand from outside the high temple walls by where the priests were. Adiris had her first ceremony, and she visited the priest's sanctuary chamber. When she lit the candles, she noticed a narrow opening at the back. Sliding through the gaps, she reached the crypt hidden under the sanctuary. The chamber was bare except for the golden statue of a woman who stood with outstretched hands, her fingers covered in jewels. It was a sign Adiris had been waiting for. And then the end. But her faith was tried when she showed the first signs of infection. Her cough became a mix of phlegm and blood. Her neck erupted in abscesses, and her foot darkened. Ashamed of her condition, she began wearing a veiled headpiece that carried a censer that masked the rank smell of sick that clung to her skin. Hoping to be saved, She kept performing the rituals, offering blessed water and food to her followers, but no ritual could save her. In a desperate attempt to appease the gods, Adira banished herself from the city. She traveled north with a few followers, venturing to the cold woodlands of Urashtu until it was no longer possible to walk. They were in a damp cave and Adira laid in a pool of vomit. Her foot turned black and it was swollen. She could not go any further. Her followers, and she realized the truth in the cave. They were all infected with the plague. Kneeling among the wretched followers, Adira made one last prayer. The black fumes of incense rose into the damp air before being wiped off by a cold breeze. Neither the body of Adira nor those of her followers were ever found. Many told tales of her return, but no one truly knew what fate had befallen the High Priestess of Babylon. Next is Ghostface. Danny Johnson, known as Jed Olsen by some, grabbed the newspaper from the kitchen counter. It was a week old, but his face was on the front page, grainy and sunken. It was one of those muggy afternoons in Florida, when heat and humidity permeated everything in the kitchen, making him sweat while standing still. He slouched in a damp chair to read. This article had better be good. His work in Roseville had been outstanding. And then there's a bunch of stuff like Ghostface disappears June 18, 1993. And then there were Roseville murders. So Olsen had been working at the newspaper for 5 months when the Roseville murders began. Victims from young to old stabbed to death in their homes due to Ghostface. The Ghostface panic swelled in Roseville when Olsen produced footage of a hooded figure breaking into a house at night. The masked face of white blur in the dark stared at the camera for a second before disappearing inside. The Ghostface caught on tape was the resulting article written by Olsen. He seemed proud of his work at the time, enjoying how the whole town feared his ghost stories. Weeks later, Olsen left a note on his work desk and disappeared. I hope you liked my stories. I enjoy bringing them to life. Don't worry, I'm not done. Jed Olsen, that's a quote. The Roseville law enforcement still refuses to comment, as Jed Olsen remains at large. Danny smiled, ripping out the article from the newspaper. When the investigation had been pointing to him, he packed his bags and left Roseville swiftly. And then a shiver ran through him. A chilling breeze transformed the bedroom humidity into an opaque, freezing fog. A woman shrieked. Dead leaves crunched under his feet. He smiled in anticipation. Next is the Demogorgon. I love Demogorgon. Well, it's short. A blooming mouthful of needle-like teeth for a face. Large, curved, razor-sharp claws and powerful legs to pounce on victims make the Demogorgon a frightening monster to face in any dimension. It is a nightmare of unrestrained feral rage as it hunts down its prey and rips it to pieces, devouring every last morsel of flesh and gore, leaving nothing for scavengers. The creature is untouched by any sense of compassion or restraint looming over its victim. It shows no doubt or mercy, just the pure instinct of its insatiable bloodlust as it delivers the death blow. A perfect hunter, the Demogorgon is a accurate testament to the horrors lurking in the Upside Down and why it was choice pickings for the entity. That's interesting and mysterious. Next is Dione. Honoring his family name was never enough for Kazan Yamoka. He wanted to surpass his father's reputation and end what he saw as a thinking of samurai culture, with farmers often posing as samurai. His father tried to turn Kazan's attention to more noble pursuits, but he refused to heed his advice. And borrowing his father's katana, he embarked on a dark pilgrimage to prove his worth in rich band of impostors. Ignoring the code that had been taught to him, he killed impostors in the hills and the valleys, on the beaches and in the woodland. The killings were brutal, cruel, and morbid. He humiliated farmers and warriors alike. stripping them of their armor. His rage, bloodlust, and perverse sense of honor knew no bounds. Monks believed he was possessed by something dark and otherworldly, and cursing him while a noble lord began to call him Oniyamoka, the rageful samurai, and insult both the Kazan and his family. Eventually, he was satisfied and exited the villa to find himself surrounded by dozens of farmers wielding rusted scythes, sharp pitchforks, and heavy clubs. He survived the first few assaults, but there were too many attackers coming from every direction. Within moments, Kazan was on the ground staring at a cold, indifferent, darkening sky as farmers took turns stabbing and torturing the Oni who had butchered their beloved lord. The frenzied mob dragged Kazan into a small stone mill to continue the torture and finally left him to die a slow, agonizing death. When they returned, the mill was filled with a strange black fog. Kazan's body and the Kanabo were nowhere to be found. It was the beginning of a dark legend about a rageful Oni haunting the town. Okay, next is Deathslinger. Wow, they really back up the lore as time goes. Born in the dust-ridden badlands of the American Midwest, Caleb Quinn was son to struggling Irish immigrants. On the edge of the frontier, sickness, famine, and death were common sights, and pioneers contended for whatever scraps they could claim while tycoons feasted. Caleb's father, once an engineer, had few options to ply his trade as businesses, posted a common sign: "No Irish need apply." His antiquated tools lay untouched for years until Caleb uncovered them. Noticing his son's interest in the trade, he gifted him his old wrench. Eventually reaching the warden's office, Caleb kicked the door and was met with a fortunate sight. It wasn't only the prison warden who cowered in a corner, but Henry Bayshore, overpowered with rage. Caleb rushed to Bayshore, beating, bludgeoning, tearing at his flesh. The man's blood dripped from his face. Crimson blowing at his feet, the Hellshire King swarmed the warden, snapping bones with each kick. With the two men broken, begging for death, the boss they dragged them to the commons, where they were left to the growing crowd of prisoners. Soaked in blood and sweat, Caleb hollowed to his old cell, hardly paying notice to Bayshore's screams. He sat on the bed's edge as drops of blood ran from his fingertips. A thick, unnatural fog streamed through the barred window. He pulled out his old wrench, cracked and rusted, and ran a thumb along the metal, regarding it with faded eyes. He couldn't remember when it came into his possession. He didn't care to remember. At his feet, he saw a dusty path, and at its end silhouettes of all who had done him wrong. The boys who bullied him, the executives who took advantage of him, and again, Henry Bayshore, emerging from a fog were the tools to dispose of them. Unforgiving steel hooks, brilliant and beautiful in his simplicity. Pain tore through his leg as he stood, but he endured, pushing onwards, walking the dusty path, leaving a trail of blood flowing behind him. Wow. Next is Pyramid Head. A sadistic and merciless executioner, Pyramid Head is fixated on dispensing punishment through pain, encumbered by the steel frame upon his head and with the hulking great blade and toe. He stalked the hellish corridors of Silent Hill, committed to a duty that no one understood. Where he trod, even monsters fled for the shadows, and those who crossed his path fell victim to unrestrained acts of aggression. When his duty was complete and his presence no longer needed, he prepared for the long rest, and yet his skills were required elsewhere. The fog that streamed over him was somehow different than that he was accustomed to in Silent Hill, as if each whisk contained the nerves of a creature, frightening, seeking him out. There was an unspoken agreement in that moment. The billowing cloud was an invitation to duty and sadism. The Pyramid Head, taking a step into the fog, accepted his obligation once more. Last but not least, we have The Blight, which I'm pretty sure is like a novel. it is. To understand the human condition, one must rise above it. This was the credo of Talbot Grimes, a Scottish chemist whose unrestrained ambition took him to towering heights. As a boy, he was a popular child, bright, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge authority. Yet despite his social graces, he was fiercely independent, spending much of his time exploring the sprawling fields near his town alone. What began as a child's curiosity nearly turned deadly after experimenting with a batch of poisonous foxglove. For days he laid in bed dripping with sweat, purging any food that touched his stomach. When he recovered it wasn't fear that gripped him, but fascination. There was something magical in it, how a single flower could so drastically affect him. Awoken again. Each time easier than the last, he tongued a hollow crabs between his teeth. How long he wondered, a faint memory turned the soul chemical. His notes, the verge of a breakthrough, a faraway whisper entered his mind. He fumbled with a stone, sharpening it with shaking hands. In the dim light of the den amongst the catatonic occupants, he carved his research from memory into the walls. He wrote for hours until his fingers bled, moving to the floor, taking in everything the voice whispered despite his inability to comprehend it. When there was nowhere left to write, he gripped the stone and carved the message into his chest. Stained with blood, he witnessed a miracle appear before him. A magnificent field of lush orange flowers. The whispered voice beckoned to him, urging him to enter the field and discover worlds, dimensions, beyond human comprehension. For a moment, Talbot felt the sense of wonder he possessed as a child. The denizens of the opium den awoke to silence, the dry scent of smoke still lingering in the air. Shambling out of their drug-faced fog, they found the stone floor wet and with blood, tiny rivulets coursing through the cracks. His eyes adjusted to the darkened room. The jagged letterings crawled along its length began to appear, ran over and over without end. There was but one single line: "Death is only the beginning." And that are all the killer files and kind of summarized. This video is probably going to be like an hour long, and I don't want it to be super long, so I'm sorry that I had to quickly go through some of them. I'll make like a part 2 or something, or do something in the future for more lore of stuff that I missed. So thank you so much for listening to the